room for 6 people, if anyone would like to come up and be seated here. And there's room for 3 people on the couch to my left, if you'd like to come up and be seated. Straight over here. Anyone else?
Good evening. My name is William, and Joe White was my brother. Today we gather to mourn, to pay homage, give our respects, and share our sorrow together for the loss of a very dear, sweet, kind, and caring person who has touched all of our lives and was taken from us far too early in his life. I want to start by thanking everyone who has come here today. Joe's passing was completely unexpected and has totally blindsided and devastated my family. But the outpouring of love and support we felt this past week has really touched us and is helping us get through these very difficult times. I want to thank our extended family and friends who have dropped by our house with care packages to help feed us and nurture our tender hearts. I want to thank those who have traveled long distances to be here, and all of Joe's close friends who have helped organize this event. I want to thank his former colleagues, schoolmates, and everyone else who has stepped up and shared their memories about Joe with us via Facebook, on email, or on the telephone. All of you help remind us how much love there is for Joe and how much love he gave you all. And that is something that we can cherish forever. Joe was my big brother. He was 5.5 years older than me, and I always looked up to him. He was funny and smart, handsome and charming. And above all, Joe put his friends and his family first. If you were ever in trouble and needed his help, Joe would drop everything and do anything he could to save the day. On more than one occasion in my life, when things appeared their darkest, Joe was the cavalry that came to my rescue. When all hope was lost, Joe would sit up and explain how he was going to solve your problem. It would make you feel better, but then he'd actually do it. He did it. He was no flake, and he never asked nor seemed to want anything in return. He simply loved selflessly. As a teenager, I was always amazed at what a cool life my brother had. He was an incredibly talented and fearless performer with the power to enthrall an audience, seduce women, and charm men. In high school, I worked at a fish market and a local butcher, where my brother breathed fire and juggled machetes. As we got older, Joe's passion for technology and gadgets grew. And even though I'm the one who now lives and works in Silicon Valley, it was often my brother who would turn me on to the latest new tech trends. Indeed, it was Joe who brought home our first computer and taught me how to program in BASIC when we were very young. He was a true early adopter, and he had an incredible gift for explaining technology to people in a way that they could understand. I learned a lot from just listening to him. He would take the time to think about each person's own experience and he could present complex information distilled down into bits that would make sense to them. That's a talent that I continue to work on today, and I'm so sad that my brother Joe is no longer here to help me learn. Nothing about Joe's passing makes any sense to me. It was probably the last thing in the world I expected to hear when I picked up the phone last Saturday morning. But nonetheless, here we are. I worry for my parents, and I feel bad for my own loss. But probably most of all, I'm sad that my 6-month-old son, Tatum, will never get the chance to meet his Uncle Joe in person. I know how much joy Tatum would bring to Joe and how much love my brother had to give. But I'm so grateful for the time that I did have with him, and I'm so glad that he was my brother. I miss you, Joe. You will always be in my thoughts and in my heart forever. Now, I'd like to introduce our first guest, someone whom my brother loved very much, our father, Mr. Randall.
Thanks, Wayne. Joe, I think, would tell me that the talk I'm about to give was too long. I think that in this occasion, that might be a little bit more acceptable than usual. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Joe's sudden and altogether unexpected death has shattered Jean and I. I hope I'll be forgiven if I suddenly burst into tears at various points in my remarks about just how great a guy and fine a human being Joe was. Even if, like all the rest of us, he was also deeply complex and, of course, only rarely perfect. To put things into some practical perspective right at the start, the awesome American jazz innovator Charlie Parker died when he was 34, and the legendary English political writer George Orwell died when he was 46. Joe has managed to come in more or less in the middle of this range. He was 42. It might seem not quite right to put Joe in this glamorous anti-heroic company, a species of the exaggeration for which his mother is justly and wonderfully famous. But it makes sense to me. Charlie Parker and George Orwell have meant a lot in my personal life, but they have meant nothing like what Joe has meant. Then there's a sense in which Joe's achievements actually bear some comparison with the achievements of such street-level artists as Orwell and Parker. Joe was, as many have told me over the past several days, a very smart guy, a busker, a juggler, and a magician, a gifted analyst and student of the World Wide Web, a talented web sales executive, and what one Rogers client survey once called the last of the great media generalists. We are all artists in our own way, even if we never rise to the breathless heights of Charlie Parker or George Orwell, both of whom also seem to have believed passionately in what might be called the democracy of talent. Joe said to me recently that he saw himself as a kind of artist. Like so many other things he said, he meant it as a kind of joke. But there is some deeper truth in it too, I think. Joe stood for the side in all of us that wants to be an artist, that wants to make ordinary life more interesting and engaging. And hanging around Joe, in my experience, was a way of making your life more interesting and engaging. Or to use a phrase that cropped up at an alleged funeral service planning meeting this past Tuesday night with Leyland, Rob, Paul, and Mike, along with William and Jean, he was a curator of cool stuff. Some of my own warmest memories of Joe inevitably go back to his childhood. He was a classic, almost Tom Sawyerish boy of his time and place, like some updated character out of Robert Thomas Allen's book, When Toronto Was for Kids. Yet, even at an early age, he didn't lack ambition or concern for material goals. He was a Toronto Star paper boy for a time, and he played a starring role in his public school presentation of The Wiz. One time my father came to visit us here in the Beaches, and he walked on Queen Street for a bit before arriving at our place, apparently bumping into Joe along the way. When he finally landed at our door and said, "Do you know that Joey knows every owner of every store on Queen Street?" Joe was about 8 or 9 years old at the time, but it has often seemed to me that this was the beginning of his adult career as an artful salesman, who at least every now and then, and more than many, broke commercial record books. High school, generally for Joe, as for many among us, was not a time of wonder, even though he did finish the old grade 13 as an Ontario scholar. But it was during these same years that his youthful careers as first a magician and then a juggler, busker, and street performer began to develop. Joe's partner in these particular artistic crimes quickly became the amazing and more or less amazingly bilingual Leyland Gordon, with whom Joe retained a strong, constructive, and creative friendship down to the present, even if their street performing days faded into the Canadian sunset some time ago. Street performing, as the dynamic duo known as Streetlights, nonetheless gave Joe and Leyland an impressive source of financing during their student years and at least a bit beyond. Those who know Jean, my wife, and Joe's very loving and attentive mother, will not be surprised to hear that she liked to help him count his and Leyland's street performing earnings when he came home after a good summer weekend at Harbourfront. And it was not too unusual for the take on a high season weekend to exceed $3,000 in a day when that amount of money was worth more than it is now. After his childhood paper route, Joe never had any formal part-time or summer jobs from high school through university. The money he made from magic and juggling, throwing flaming torches or juggling pins back and forth with Leyland, and blowing fire across the Toronto city skyline, provided more than enough of what he needed at that stage of his life. Joe and Leyland finally juggled and street performed their way across Europe as well. And I'll always remember one of Joe's phone calls home from that trip in which he reported that Venice was shockingly beautiful. At the end of the trip, the two street performers spent a final week or so in London, England, where they stayed at the home of Leyland's uncle, Elliot Grove. Just a few days ago, I received a poignant email message from Elliot expressing condolences over Joe's sudden and altogether unexpected death. I will be taking the liberty of reading this transatlantic email when I conclude my remarks here, which I promise will not be too much longer now. Joe studied political science at the University of Toronto and graduated in 1994. I don't think he had any intention of becoming a politician or a government bureaucrat, but this was a subject that complemented his general interest in the state of the human universe. Joe was also someone, I think, who could appreciate the Canadian economic historian Harold Innis's remark that no one can study political science in Canada without a sense of humor. Joe's first full-time job after graduating from university was in the advertising business with Media Buying Services. Excuse me, now located at Dundas Square, but then on Bloor Street West by Avenue Road. And I should say, I think I have the details here and elsewhere in Joe's employment history tolerably incorrect, but my apologies if I make some layman's mistakes. Joe received some good training and experience at MBS, but not a lot of money. At one family gathering, he told a cousin of mine that he was at least making enough to pay his bar bill. At the same time, I think he enjoyed working in the Bloor and Avenue Road Midtown area of the later 1990s, where he had a girlfriend and made many friends. From MBS, Joe moved on to selling ads in Today's Parent magazine, which when he joined the organization was perhaps at its height as a model, innovative public communicator and employer. It was at the time located on Widmer Street, just west of John Street between Queen and King, in an area that would quickly grow into a dynamic new entertainment and fashion hub. Joe soon moved into a loft-type apartment on Widmer himself, about 2 or 3 minutes walk from his office. Excuse me. Not too long after this, Joe moved about a block down the street on Widmer into an apartment that he shared with his girlfriend of the day. Kitty corner across the street from this apartment was an excellent Italian restaurant known as, if I remember correctly, The Wedge. Joe became a regular habitué along with a growing group of fascinating friends and colleagues from the advertising and related businesses in the area, many of whom I am happy to see here today. From Today's Parent, which I think made him in many ways as the last of the great media generalists, Joe went on to become advertising director of Shift Magazine, Toronto's innovative bid to track the progress of the World Wide Web and the Internet revolution. It was a very unfortunate thing, I think, for Toronto and for Joe and many others that Shift did not finally survive. At a wake for the magazine just before its ultimate demise, I was told by the publisher that Joe had sold the only profitable issue of Shift which had ever been published. Joe finally returned to Today's Parent after Shift folded, and then when Rogers took over Today's Parent, he became part of the Rogers Communications empire. Eventually, he began to specialize in web-based advertising sales, which mobilized his talents as a gifted analyst and student of the internet. Joe set sales records for 2 years running in Rogers' web-based advertising unit. But in my, I suppose, inevitably somewhat prejudiced view, he became increasingly unhappy with the increasingly bureaucratized Rogers approach to the business he knew best. Over the past few years, I think Joe was looking for a new kind of economic structure for the second half of his life on planet Earth. He was no doubt struggling in some degree, as many of us have struggled at similar junctures in our lives. My own similar struggles from back when gave me what I at least thought was some understanding of what he was trying to do, with all its attendant deep frustrations as well as its sweet rewards. He had wisely saved his money from an early point in his work career, and his first step in a new direction was to buy some rental real estate, which gave him the beginnings of an alternate income. He was also trying to work something of his earlier success in web-based advertising sales into his new economic structure. The coroner's autopsy of Joe's sudden passing away at the age of 42 has now determined that he died from an extremely severe case of viral pneumonia in the midst of an ice storm and some of the coldest weather Toronto has seen in some time, to say nothing of recent outbreaks of H1N1. One of the greatest tragedies of all this is that Joe, I think, was on the brink of defining and mobilizing the new economic structure he had been working on for the past few years. He had enough money to live comfortably and continue his work as a curator of cool stuff. He was, it seems to me, as someone who watched this side of his life quite closely, starting to figure out how to make this curatorial work generate a new economic career for the last half of his life. Another of the great tragedies of Joe's sudden death from an extremely severe case of viral pneumonia is that he was, we can alas now see in retrospect, obviously much sicker or physically ill over the past few months than any of us realized, including Joe himself and his doctor. That itself, I think, was partly the result of the side of Joe's personality that always tried to put his best foot forward in public. Like all of us, he had some ups and downs over the past frantic holiday season that I can testify, as can others in this room I know, that he showed also, as usual, moments of high wit and intelligence and great personal charm. Almost too many such moments, you might say, to make anyone think he was really in any kind of life-threatening circumstances. Yet he was in life-threatening circumstances. And now, like everyone else, I'm looking for some consolation and understanding. You'll be happy to hear that I only have 3 such personal offerings in this direction left. The first is that whatever else, Joe's artistry as a mere human being has left me a greater and more immediate sense of how to make my ordinary life more interesting and engaging than anything I have received from Charlie Parker or George Orwell or anyone else like that. Even though I do feel I have received important things from these people too. I similarly believe that Joe's love for me and everyone else he loved, which I'm sure includes everyone in this room and many more, will last forever, and my love for him will last forever too. My second offering here involves just reading, as mentioned earlier, the email message I received from Leyland's uncle across the sea, Elliott Grove, 2 days after Joe tragically passed away. Dear Randall, I am Leyland's uncle and I am not sure whether we have ever met. But I write because I knew Joe from the time he was very young when he visited London. I just this evening returned from a business trip from Paris to hear from Leyland this tragic news. I knew and admired Joe and always thought the most of him. I can't imagine how you and your family are coping in such circumstances. And indeed, as you mentioned, it is a very hard thing to understand. My wife, Suzanne, and my 2 daughters, Desiree and Zara, burst into tears when they heard. We all knew and loved Joe and will remember him for his cheerful disposition, tremendous energy, and his wonderful support and friendship with Leyland. Please accept our deepest condolences, and may you and your family find strength in this very difficult time. Finally, I want to read a few selected lines from a poem by W.H. Auden. As far as I know, Joe did not know this at all, but it has become something I seem to go back to again and again, and its underlying message, so to speak, which I think is dark and bright at the same time, realistic yet still cheerful, reminds me of the even more interesting man of 42 that Joe had become, and was on the verge of taking to still greater heights. I should quickly add that in order not to test your patience beyond the lines I've already crossed, I'm not reading all of Auden's poem here, but only what seems to me the most strategic verses in memory of Joe, as he was in the early Toronto winter of 2013-2014 at the age of 42. As I walked out one evening, walking down Bristol Street, the crowds upon the pavement were fields of harvest wheat. And down by the brimming river, I heard a lover sing, under an arch of the railway, love has no ending. But all the clocks in the city began to whir and chime. Oh, not let time deceive you. You cannot conquer time. In headaches and in worry, vaguely life leaks away, and time will have his fancy, tomorrow or today. Into many a green valley drifts the appalling snow. Time breaks the threaded dances and the diver's brilliant bow. Oh, look, look in the mirror. Oh, look in your distress. Life remains a blessing, although you cannot bless. Oh, stand, stand at the window as the tears scald and start. You shall love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart. God bless you, Joe.
Thank you. When Joe was 13 years old, he started taking magic lessons and learning card tricks at a place just down the street from here called the Magic Shop. While studying there, he met someone who would become his partner in crime and one of his closest lifelong friends, Mr. Leyland Gordon, who's now going to share with you some thoughts.
It's just amazing to see all of you here. So many faces, so many memories. It's certainly been a hard week. I'm stunned. I believe that faith resides deep within a person and beyond the reach of language. And to stand here and have to say these words so early is deeply painful. But I think that what I can give you is how I knew Joe, and that I know how he would feel about this. We all know that Joe had a wonderful sense of humor, a great sense of irony, a big heart, someone who was always there, someone who was in so many ways so selfless, even if he compromised himself, he would be there. I met Joe at that magic time, at the Magic Shop, as a teenager, when, as I know Joe loves this line, Stewie Griffin would say from Family Guy, you get to that age where you're 14 and your parents call you dicks and give you a glass of wine. And you're sneaky about everything, you're sneaking cigarettes, you're sneaking your little bits of alcohol, you're living through that time of youth. And the experiences Joe and I went through very young, as really, boys just becoming men and performing down at the beaches, taking our linking rings and our suitcase and our magic hats, and, where we almost brought the birds too. We knew they're smart enough to know they fly away. And going down there and working and going through, I know that there are a few performers here today that know this feeling very clearly when you're trying to reach out to a stranger to entertain them and they completely pan everything that you are trying to offer. That's a very cold place to be. Joe and I were in that place, and we'd start off making maybe 75 cents to $1 a show, which became $7.50. And we stuck it out together, and boy, was he ever my mate, and I couldn't have done it alone. And we succeeded. And as Randall has so elegantly alluded to and presented today, Joe had that talent. He had that ability not only to reach out to those that knew him, but to those that did not as well, and to touch people. It's a profound loss for us. not to have this person in our midst anymore. Joe and I used to talk about this after my father passed. And he said, well, so, you know, Joe would say, well, no, dude, like, either I'm going to be at your funeral or you're going to be at mine. And it's just the way it goes. It's unbelievably tragic, but I can only assure you that Joe doesn't want one person in this room to suffer. Although we are. All I can say is, I love you, Joseph McDonald White. You touched my life in a way that is unforgettable. Your memory will always live on. And I don't want to forget you.
Thank you. Families come in all shapes and sizes, and our family is no different. Joe is blessed to have two families, and I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Joe's biological father from Dundalk, Mr. Jamie Jackson.
As Will has said, I'm Jamie Jackson. I'm Joe's other dad. I'm here with my wife Sharon, family and friends. First, I want to acknowledge that Jean and Randy, it was they who raised Joe to be that kind, creative, unfettered, unique man we all knew. Joe reunited with my family some 8 years ago, 2005. That's the year his eldest niece, Helen, was born. It was Father's Day. I got a call from Joe. It had been a long time since our paths had crossed. Could we get together? With that, all our lives changed. We were drenched and enriched with the spirit of Joe. He gave so much more than he got. First and foremost, he brought us a family again. My mom had been so heartbroken having lost a grandson some 40 years ago. After she passed, I read in her diary how fearful she was that Joe would be so scarred. Now she had her Joe and could see what a fine young man he had become. We all enjoyed her 88th and then her 90th birthday celebrations. His sisters, Sherry and Megan, watched as he juggled, cajoled, and tugged at the hearts of their children, and their hearts too. His wacky Christmas toys, beasts you threw against the wall only to watch them slither slowly down, cans that spurted streams of colored goop all over our furniture, tops that lit up when spun, planes, many flying things, finger attachments that lit up, and watching him patiently explain to each child how to put them together and how they all work. All that helped to bring a new sense of Christmas spirit to our family. Joe and I didn't get together as much as we should have, maybe half a dozen times a year. Birthdays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, our summer garden party, the odd movie, theater, meal out. But when we did get together, we didn't miss a hug or an I love you, and for that I'm very thankful. Whenever we got together, Joe and I spent long hours late into the night with various spirits, ruminating about the universe, life. What's it all about, Alfie? What's the meaning of life? How best can we understand this gift? What is basic to be successful at living? When Sharon and I next visited our little house, we found on top of the fridge a set of 4 glasses that Joe had left for us. The week before, he had stayed at our little house as his had lost hydro in the infamous Toronto ice storm. I guess he left these glasses as a gift. Each glass inscribed with a single word: laugh, live, dream, love. All placed in a plaque that read, laugh some, live a lot. Dream some, love a lot. What a marvelous clue to that.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to open the floor to anyone who would like to come up and speak and say something about Joe.
I'm Sandra, and I worked with Joe at Rogers for 4 years, and there are so many Rogers people here that I haven't seen in 4 years, and I think that, in the last week, you try to find solace in the sadness, and part of the solace, I know, and I'm mad at you, because I can't believe you're gone, and with Leyland, I've gone to his old haunts, and I posted on Facebook, and he's not there. You just think, where is he and why did he go? And you look for meaning, and I think that part of what we can learn and gain from our profound loss is reuniting with friends and so many familiar faces that I haven't seen in way too long. 2 things about Joe working with him. He would take very few vacation days. And he would come to me and say, I'm going to take a vacation day, and he'd give me this paper that I had to sign. And I'd say, just take it. I'm going to sign it. Just take it. Don't tell anyone. Are my bosses here? Here. So he would take it, and then he would put this, insane out of office, right? It would be a poem. It would be haiku. And then people would forward it to me and say, are you aware that this is Joe's out of office? And I would just say, sorry kids. Of course I'm aware of it. This is Joe. Joe is the most authentic individual I think I've ever worked with, and taught me so much about being who you are and never apologizing. And the other thing is, I had lunch with him about 2 weeks ago, and much like we've all said, he just looked great. Who knew, right? Out of the blue. And we were commiserating over something together, and he said, a wise man. And I'm like, oh, please, who's the wise man? And he said, the wise man went to a party, and he told a joke. And everyone laughed. And then, about a minute later, he told the same joke, and people laughed about a little less. And about a minute later, the same guy told the same joke, and everyone just stood and stared. And he said, so I told the same joke 3 times, you stopped laughing. Why do you keep crying about the same thing? So I'm taking that as a lesson. I'm going to cry tonight. I'm going to cry for a few days, and then I'm going to stop. I love you, Joe, and I'm blessed to have you in my life, and I'm blessed to have met everyone at Rogers through Joe.
it was mentioned earlier, a trip to Europe in 1994, and so Leyland, Joe and I went together, and I wrote a little something that I wanted to share about that trip. So in May 1994, Joe Leyland and I excitedly packed up and took off for Europe, armed with the typical wares of 3 young friends, traveling for the first time. Backpacks, hostel cards, Eurail passes, traveler's checks. It was a different time, but 2 unicycles, juggling pins and machetes. Now, for me at the time, this seemed completely normal. It was what everyone does. Pearson was different then too, I think. One day on that trip, as I think about Joe, captures some of the qualities that made Joe so special. It all started one early morning in Nice. Joe, as usual, was sitting somewhere in the room, cross-legged. He was either on a bed, on the floor, sometimes on a table. There were really odd places that he could find comfortable, but cross-legged. So the first thing is flexible. I think that Joe was flexible in what he did, definitely cross-legged, something that I can't do. I had the idea that we should walk to our destination that day, a beautiful 12th century medieval town just outside of Nice. Just outside of Nice, or so I thought at the time. And Joe's response, cross-legged, early in the morning, was, let's do it. Where do we start? So spontaneous, something that I think of Joe. After 5 hours of walking, delirious from the heat, the distance, the hills, the lack of food, Joe passed the time telling jokes and imitating locals with his best Parisian française. So he was funny. We all know that. He made us laugh. When we finally arrived, exhausted, Joe didn't hit me or lay blame. He thought that this was a great way to spend a day. So he was kind. As we approached the stone wall, Joe looked, so he took out of his pocket a love letter. His girlfriend's parents at a villa close by, and he counted a row of bricks, made sure that he wrote that down somewhere so that you could tell her, and placed a letter behind a loose stone. His girlfriend got to read the letter the following Christmas. Joe was passionate and he was charming. Thank you, Joe.
Earl, Joe's father, Randy's first cousin. I knew Joe from when he was very little. I'd like to read something from my sister, Penny, who can't be here because she's up in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut, teaching a social work course. Cambridge Bay is on an island in the Arctic Ocean, so it's far away. So this is from Penny. My first significant memory of Joe was when Jean was pregnant with the baby. Joe apparently had been pressuring his parents for a piano, making his wish for such clear offer. As they were moving into a new place, Jean and Randy decided to get a piano. Suddenly, Joe decided he didn't want a piano anymore, which was kind of surprising. After a time, he was asked why. The simple thinking of a young boy who became the wonderful, thoughtful Joe we all know came clear. He wanted to make sure there was enough money and room for a crib for the baby. Joe was willing to sacrifice his much-wanted piano to make sure William had a place to sleep. This responsible, thoughtful aspect of Joe continued in his life. As part of our last conversation, Joe told me I'd find about him very little, that his footprint was extremely small. He was not willing to upload very much due to the downloading by governments and major corporations. Joe could and did take the big, important issues of his life seriously. And he did that very well. However, as we all found, Joe's main presence with us was his sense of fun. His enjoyment of almost everything in life was infectious. The way to have fun with this was a frequent part of conversations at our family event. Joe always knew how to find the joy in everything and shared that sense with all around him. His laugh and his ability to share his enjoyment was an ever-present and welcome part of our family festivities. I will always remember his gleeful little giggles, his smiles that revealed his delight in life and all things, big and small. Joe's capacity to connect with everyone, to make us feel important and special, was such a natural ability of his. On the outside, Joe and I had little in common. He was a successful advertising executive, and I an earnest social justice advocate. However, he always found a way. He always found a way for us to have a conversation at our family events. I learned a lot from Joe, and felt as if he listened to what I had to say with interest and respect. Even though Joe and I saw each other at only annual and semi-annual events, Joe made sure that the time was used to develop a significant and ongoing relationship. At those events, he was a major part of a creation of sense of strong family ties. He did it without fanfare, without drawing attention to it. Instead, it was one of the seemingly background pieces of the event. However, it was definitely an essential and extremely pleasurable part of what happened at our family gatherings. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have those special times with Joe. So thank you, Penny, for sending that from the Arctic, where it may be colder than it is here now, I'm sure. I really, really liked Joe. I liked Joe because of the kind of kid he was, and you just look at the pictures, you get a sense of what Joe brought to any event. And it was at those family events that Penny mentioned that I got to see Joe most. And the family events were in Toronto, and also up at the family cottage in Wilberforce, which is in Haliburton. As a kid, he was funny, he was kind, he was extremely active, and as he grew into adulthood, I want to thank Ray for putting that video street like that. When you see that video, it is just terrific. Go on YouTube if you don't have it. from the outside, when I watched the interaction Joe had with the kids, and Joe was older. Joe was the biggest kid in the gathering. He was the coolest kid. And he could have been a cool kid. Remote, arrogant, slightly dismissive. He was the opposite of that. As both Caitlin and Leslie say, they always felt special in Joe's presence. He gave them the sense of what they said was important, and he really, really listened in a way that made them feel part of a family that cared, an extended family that cared. I like Joe because of the way he more generally dealt with our family, the extended family. He actually seemed to like us. God knows why. That always came through. Joe made you want to be around him. Joe made you feel good. Joe made you feel special. Joe was kind, Joe was generous. I have a problem here. Not long ago, a couple of members of our family died. His grandmother died a year ago, spoke at that gathering, and then her husband died, spoke at that gathering, expressing sentiments about what they had brought to our lives. And I felt doing that quite appropriate. I felt better when I had done. I felt that it was something I could move on with. This is very, very different. Their lives were lives that they had run their course, their natural course. Joe's life didn't. So I feel stuck speaking these things about someone who was so far from being the person A, be with over the course of the extended family life, and the person that he wanted to do. I was speaking to Randy after Joe died very briefly. And we both, I said, there's a hole in the family. It's never going to be the same. It's never going to be the same without Joe. And Randy agreed. I think we were maybe wrong. It's not a hole. It's more like a chasm. Did Joe know how much we liked him, how much we loved him, how much we valued him, how much he meant to us, how much he added to our gatherings, how much he added to our experience of life? I hope so. I hope he knew that. He was fun to be around. He made you feel good. You wanted him to be around. That's not everything that Joe was. But I would say that's a heck of a legacy.
The best way to start a joke is with a speech. That's not right. But that kind of absurdity could last. My name's Paul, by the way. I'm Joe's. Could last an afternoon and would delve into more important things with life when you have a conversation with Joe. And I just wanted to share a couple of things. I'm glad I wrote them down because it's very difficult to look over at everybody and rhyme it off the top of my head. I met Joe 20 years ago at MBS, and I knew I'd like this guy because in the job function he had, clearing discrepancies, he had a stack. you know, a foot deep, and above it he had a sign that said, "The corner of woe." That was an early indicator of the type of guy Joe was, and the kind of clever comedy he could bring to any situation, unlike him writing haiku out of office emails. And I didn't write it down, but it's just coming to mind now. And not to put anyone on the spot that still works at MBS, but Joe was banned from sending jokes of the day. Entertain his people in the business that he still dealt with. He was at MBS at the time, and he was a sales rep. And he would do this, and then when that stopped happening, people would respond, "Where's the joke, Joe?" And he's like, "I can't send it anymore." Banned from sending you guys these jokes. So, and you've heard it from many other speakers, that just that kind of time he would take, whether you brighten your day or not, he made that effort to do so. It would always be up to you whether you take it or not. I don't know what I did with my phone. See, it's technology. I'm trying to figure it out. It's still a joke. He edified people. I always felt a little bit stronger, a little taller, and always walked away much more amused than had I not spent some time with Joe. So I'm not exactly sure who he'd pick this weekend, but I know he picked San Frank because William lives in San Francisco. I don't really want to make that pick, but as long as you give me New England, I think Manning's going to fold. I think we're going New England and San Fran. We'll see how that pans out. I'll put 100 on spread for you. We did our taxes, or well, let's just say Joe helped me with my taxes, and you know, magically doubled the return when I was left to my own devices to figure it out and be an honest ad sales guy. He made me rich, and I, you know, paid him in beer. And in earlier time in our lives, when I was, my lovely wife's here, but when I was single, I had a basement apartment with carpet throughout, and Joe and I were not really that good at golf. But I'm renting, and I kind of go along with the landlord, so I had a box that went by 2-4, a box, and would practice chipping in the hallway in the basement, and Joe would, on regular occasions, break right through the drywall. Which is fine, and it feels not right. I love Joe dearly, Gene and Randall, as you know. But he had the wonkiest golf swing I've ever seen. Whoever has played with him, or even see videos from industry golf tournaments, keep his feet together and have this weird wind up. And I don't know who's going to have speaking, so I don't want to steal stories from people, but a gentleman, another good friend of Joe's, Rob Sparrow, and I were golfing with Joe, and Rob was standing behind Joe. Joe's lined up at the tee off, and Rob's 3 or 4 feet behind him, just off, you know, Joe's 12 o'clock, and Joe gives it a crank, and somehow he got the ball to go forward and come back. Hit Rob right in the sternum. Which at the time we were both concerned, but then when Rob got up, we both started laughing. Which, anyway, sorry. Yeah, I'm going to miss golfing with you, Joe, and I'm never going to be a golf cart with you again, and that might be to my own benefit. He did like driving golf carts erratically. I didn't write that down, but one time he did take it right into a tree. The branch grabbed it and physically lifted the car off the ground, and I had to come and heave it with all my weight to get it off. Okay, let's get to the next hole. I don't want to get kicked off the course, Joe. You know, saying all these things, it's like, why was he such a, you know, but anyway, at the time, he knew. if I may, there's other people that would like to speak, I thought, what could I say? There's millions of these ridiculous anecdotes. Another good friend of Joe's, getting the vibe here, he's got a lot of good friends, because he edified our lives, and everyone feels better when you're around Joe. He's at Richard and Joe Girl's, call her Johanna, but it's Joe Girl, because there's Joe White and Joe Girl's. Richard and Joe Girl's wedding at John's restaurant, and Richard's got a pretty big family, and this may not relate if you don't know Richard. So those who know Richard, this story, yeah, I don't know, if you want to stand up, Richard? Okay, yes, there's Richard. So you socialize as you would do at these sort of things, and meet people you don't know. And so Joe and I are talking to a couple guys, and Joe goes, "So, are you guys brothers?" Well, obviously you're brothers, but are you related to the Ivy family? And that is one I put in my, I can't forget, that's a piece of gold. Yeah. Well, this is going forever. But yeah, Joe, technology and everything, Joe helps me with my computers, helps me figure out how to do taxes software, and now I've got to figure out Windows 8, it's a piece of garbage, I can't burn a DVD. I asked Joe about that this weekend, but I'll figure it out, and if anything, it's like, it's about time you can figure out this kind of stuff. But I love you, Joe. It was too early, and you know, go again.
I'm Richard. One of the brothers. Actually, the brother who was getting married at the time. Now, I actually didn't know anything then. I actually wasn't sure I was actually going to say anything. But I felt I really wanted to say something. I wanted to say my condolences. To say that we all know we've lost a person who meant a lot to us. But I also wanted to not just think about the sadness of the moment, but also think about and remember some of the really great things that Joe meant to us. The one thing I could say is actually Joe's was there for a lot of amazing experiences and things that I remember that are stand out in my memory. You know, from way back when I met him, I think it was about 17 years ago, because I know it was after he left MBS, and he was actually at Today's Parent, and we were having a conversation with him where he said, "Richard, you know, you made my career. You were working on Heinz, and you bought like $1.5 million worth of stuff in my first week that it was there." Yeah, so I was like, and that was like probably within the first couple of months of me knowing him. It's like, and I'm okay, well, that's good. And then but he always come back to that and say, "You know, you made my career." And I was like, great. So I remember something nice about him. And I remember something that was like the first nice thing that he ever said about me. Then, like, as time went on, we met the group and got to know him better. I mean, that was probably one of the reasons why we became friends, because he really liked me, because I helped him on his first sales job. But I also remember, because there's a lot of great memories that I have of him in meaningful times, specifically meaningful times in my life. One was my wedding with Joanna, Joe Girl. You know, we were having it. We had the wedding at the Wedge, and Joe held the reception in his apartment across from the Wedge. You know, we had everybody crammed in there, and it was like just one of those amazingly nice memories. The other thing that I remember about Joe, and I think, and as I listen to all his families, and they talk about his affinity for children and how kids love him. You know, and that is like is my kids. So I have 3 kids. One of the nicest memories I have of Joe is when the first week after Nathaniel was born, 12 years ago. We took him out to the wedge, because we always were at the wedge. On his first outing, I have a great picture of Joe sitting at the wedge, holding our son, and just another wonderful memory. And as our kids, as I had child 1, child 2, child 3, Joe would be always there for the different birthdays. He came out and did tricks and showed them and showed them how to do magic, and became affectionately known as Magic Joe. Again, another just a wonderful memory. Of course, there was our trips, things that we did as groups, that we always had a great time. Cuba. Joe didn't like flying as much as I don't think he was a big flyer sometimes, because I remember we were coming back from Cuba, and I think he had about 4 gravel just to make, and a lot of drinking the night before just to make it through the flight. And I think he looked like he was a drug dealer, because he was wearing a sugar hat and had red ringed eyes and weeping as we got on the plane. It wasn't probably the best flight of his life, but we laughed and said, you know what, when we get through customs, we're gonna have to go ahead of you, because we aren't going to go first. And then just recently, obviously, when we're talking about all these amazing things that he was planning on doing, that is true. Joe's always been a great guy. He's always been an amazing friend. He's always been selfless. He's always been there whenever anybody needs him. And I think we're gonna miss him. I'm gonna miss him. My family's gonna miss him. Our friends are gonna miss him. And I don't know when we all sit together and we have that person who's not there. We all know Joe, because he would, at various times when we were hanging out, just disappear. No idea where he went. He's gone home. Okay. He went to the bathroom. He's not really back. So it's going to be really tough sitting and having drinks and having beer with guys and not knowing that he's not going to be coming back. So I just wanted to share a few memories, but also to let you know that the memories that we have with him is a great guy, are really the ones that are going to last. I'm going to try to forget this week, but I'm going to remember all the things that he meant to us, and remember all the great things that we've always cherished. And thank you.
Anyone else that wants to say anything?
Our family won't shut up now. When's the started? I'm going to ask you all to forgive me for a second first. I had the presence of mind to write a lot of stuff down. I don't know if it's the presence of mind or if it's just where I automatically went when I got the news. But there's a lot of swear words. So I'm going to do my best to edit most of it out while I speak, but if not, please forgive me. I'm really sorry. I was really upset while I was writing it. And essentially, this is for Joe. The world for me seemed a little emptier this week. I still find it unbelievable that we're all here today, that this is what we're doing. I feel like we're not supposed to be here at a funeral. But somewhere in some alternate universe, our alternate selves are celebrating the news that Joe's first child has arrived, that he's met the girl of his dreams, and he's had some fantastic tropical wedding, that he's just made $1 million, or even that he was moving somewhere fantastic like Hawaii or California or somewhere. I can imagine almost anything but this. It can't be real, it isn't right, it certainly isn't fair. It isn't supposed to be what happens. I was going to bring up joke of the day. But it's already in here, and I'm gonna throw myself off if I don't say it. So way back in '97, Joe set up those daily emails that he sent out to all his friends. He come up with the idea, Will, I think, design the whole thing for him. And every day you'd open up your email, and there it would be. It was usually something decently funny, and sometimes it was a bit corny. When Will phoned Richard out of the blue this past Sunday, Richard at the time said it never occurred to him that Will would be phoning to tell us that his big brother had died. It didn't even cross his mind when he said, "How are you, Will?" And Will replied, "Not very good, Richard." I keep hoping, or have kept hoping throughout the week, that this would be some sort of ridiculous joke. But I know it was not the style of Joe's humor to carry something like this out. I remember when Joe used to talk about his times over at Today's Parent when he first started with the company, how he lived only a block and a half away from his work, and how he enjoyed going from work every day for the 5-minute commute, commuting the 5-minute walk home, and he could eat everywhere else in between. And he always seemed kind of wistful about it. He was a bit of a homebody that way, and that's one of the things that I remember most about him. Although, ironically, Joe traveled with me, Paul, Rob, Richard, to Cuba, as well as to PEI, and even up to our family cottage now and then. In fact, Joe played with me, I think, the only game of golf I have ever agreed to play. He made it fun. He told me I was allowed to throw the club, that was part of the experience. Unfortunately, I've never golfed again. It wasn't for his lack of attempt. Richard and I were both regulars at Joe's Adelaide Street apartment on Friday nights for a long time. For those of you that don't go back that far, it was practically across the street from his apartment at Widmer. There was a ritual of beer and of South Park and The Simpsons, and the phone would ring the whole time. There would be a bunch of us, and Joe was always the consummate host. You could always feel at home at his place. He made you feel at ease. There was always beer in the fridge. Some of it we'd bring ourselves, but usually he'd ensure that it was properly stocked before we'd even arrive. There was music always playing. He always had something to show you, some new gadget or download or website or app. We'd take off for our respective homes or the bar. We'd get home late. We all had a good time. On our trip to Cuba that first year that I met Joe and Richard and Paul and Rob, they'd been planning the trip a while, and when someone casually suggested I come, I surprised them all and agreed to go. They were pretty good about me crashing the whole trip. They took it reasonably well. The girls that we met on the beach took it less. Well, it was a great time, and when we got back, Sandra, you may recall going through that pack of pictures that had been recently developed before Joe or even the rest of us had seen it. And a lot of that trip was quite inebriated. And Joe was as surprised as Sandra to find the picture of the topless woman on his shoulders in the middle of the water. But he was so innocent, and he was so sweet and gentle that I don't think she could help but forgive him, because he said, "I didn't know she was going to do that." And you really would believe him when he said something like that. We did all the things we were supposed to do in that trip. We spent a day and a night in Havana. We spent the rest of the time on the beach or at the bar. We got ham and cheese from the bartender when we were hungry, and never quite figured out how we could order just cheese for me because I didn't eat the ham. Richard said earlier that our kids always knew Joe as Magic Joe. And in our house, aside from being Magic Joe, he was just Joe. And one of the most significant aspects of that for me is that I was always Joe Girl to his Joe. Everybody called me Joe Girl when we went out together, with the exception of Joe. And he would always call me, I'm so annoyed with you. He would always call me JoJo. And he said it in the way that a kid chewing bubble gum would say it. It had such a great sound to it, and therefore he was one of the few people that I would tolerate that nickname from. Nobody else ever calls me JoJo. And Joe, it was an honor and a privilege to have known you. I liked you immediately and always. You were deeply loved, and you will be greatly missed, and you will be forever in my heart. Wherever you are, wherever this path has led you from this life to the next, whatever comes next, I hope you are there, taking a long drag and enjoying the view. I hope it's a Monty Python skit. I hope it's a laugh riot. I hope that whatever dreams you left this earth with unfulfilled, you realize to overwhelming excess. We will see you when we get there. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. Those are great stories. Is there anyone else that wants to say anything? Please do.
I haven't seen Joe in so many years that I had to train myself to call him Joe when he came here today. I remember Joe as Joey, and I don't know his family who remembers me, but I was a friend of his and magical partner back, way back when, until we were about 14. And I haven't seen him in so many years, but I'm hearing a lot of pain and loss, and I went through something when I heard, and Lynn, thank you so much for letting me know that Joe had passed, because otherwise I wouldn't have known. I went through something very profound, and I had to go through my house and look for everything that reminded me of Joe. And I found some photographs, and I found a few old magic trinkets here and there, and I was desperate to find a tape that he'd made, a Dr. Demento tape. He stayed up late. He was fond of staying up late and watching SNL, and staying up late and listening and recording Dr. Demento. And he'd done this very special tape for me that I was looking for, and I couldn't find it to save the life of me. I looked through every tape that I had. Believe it or not, I have tons of tapes left. And I couldn't find it, and I sat down 2 o'clock in the morning after keeping my wife up, looking through our bedroom for these tapes. And I realized something very important, is that I didn't need the tape. Is that 28 years later, it was fresh in my mind how he touched me, because it wasn't about up here, and it wasn't about the cassette, which probably wouldn't play anymore anyway. He had touched me deeply in my heart, and he had supported me. He was there, and cool as a cucumber when I got thrown after being hit by a car. He helped me get home and then to the hospital, and even tried to hide it from my mother because we suddenly felt like we'd done something wrong. And sure enough, the injuries were not hideable. And then I remember Joe, because he was a very giving person and very cool and calm. I remember distinctly the one time he lost his cool because he didn't know exactly how to support me when my aunt had died in my home, and he came running over to my house as soon as he heard the news, didn't know what to say, and he walked with me through the laneway, which we used to play in as children, and he said to me, "I wish that somebody would mess with you right now so that I could kick their ass." And that was the only thing to say to a 13-year-old child who was going through grief, because nothing else that anybody said to me I remember to this day. So I just, if it's any consolation, I have not seen him in probably 20 years, and we haven't been close for 28 years, but it doesn't make any difference, because it was like it was yesterday for me. And I would imagine 28 years from now, you'll all have the same memories. Thank you very much for filling all the gaps in for the years that I haven't seen him, because it sounds like wonderful years that followed, and I wish, there were more to come, but they'll stay fresh forever, I think, because he touched you in a place that you'll always have. Thank you.
I recently became a dad, and my son Tatum, who Joe loved very much, he's still unable to walk or talk. In fact, we saw him on FaceTime just a couple days ago. He was rolled over back and forth. That was pretty exciting. He had some pretty impressive talents, though. He has some mad avant-garde jazz piano skills, I'm sure up on YouTube. And with the help of my wonderful wife, Lauren, he was able to write a poem for my brother, which I will read now. To Uncle Joe, by Tatum. Good night, Uncle Joe. Good night, Moon. Good night, Busker. Good night is too early, and it's far too soon. In heaven now, nestled between cloud and sun, a bright future there for you has only just begun. Already filling your world with music, movies, and funny pics, and impressing the angels with all your juggling tricks. The things you cherished here, they have touched us all. Your whimsical nature on our Sunday call. Special to you, your bond to Jean, Randy, and Will. Many envy that connection that is felt strongly still. We think of your memory, and we will never forget. A place at Sunday dinner for you will always be set. Behind your kind smile and bright blue eyes, a deeply sentimental, loving man in casual disguise. In your heart, your family, friends, and felines cherished every day, and your love was felt strongly by your generous ways. You are loved by so many, like all who are here. Know your loyalty and your friendship will never disappear. It's easy to get angry at the harsh cold of December, but it's about the place of love in our hearts, and I promise always to remember. Uncle Joe, I'm sad you were taken from me far too soon. Good night, Joe. Good night, Moon. Leyland recently posted a song on Facebook, which I think Joe had shared with many of us. It's a beautiful song, which he really loved. And it'll always remind me of him, not only because he played it for me the first time, but it really, truly represents what Joe was all about and what really mattered to him. So let's listen to that song right now.
Sentimental, I know, but I just really like it. I am hardly religious. I'd rather break bread with Dawkins than Desmond to be honest. And yes, I have all of the usual objections. The consumerism, the commercialization of an ancient religion, to the westernization of a dead Palestinian press gang into selling PlayStations. visit from Jesus, I'll be seeing my dad. My brother and sisters, my gran and my mom, they'll be drinking white wine in the sun. I'll be seeing my dad. My brother and sisters, my gran and my mom, they'll be drinking white wine in the sun. I don't go in for ancient wisdom. I don't believe just 'cause ideas are tenacious, it means that they're worthy. I it's sentimental, I know.
This concludes our service. I'd like to thank all of you for coming and everyone who spoke. Margaret, would you like to come, please?
I just can't. I just can't not say something. I just have to say that I was Joe's mother, was lucky enough to be Joe's mother and have a wonderful, wonderful son. And I was lucky enough to have 42 years with him. But beyond that, I was lucky enough to have another wonderfully talented son as well, Bill. I don't know how any mother could be more lucky than I am. With both John Bella's wonderful, wonderful sons. But even more than all of that, I wanted to say I was lucky enough to have Randy, who was a wonderful father, to both of our sons. And our hearts are broken. And we appreciate everything that everyone has said tonight. And for coming. And we will love Joe forever. And we will never forget him. And thank you all so much for sharing this with us. He was a beautiful, beautiful person. And so was his brother. And so thank you.
There's been a lot of crying here, and I know that Joe wouldn't want this to be a strictly somber affair. So let us now celebrate Joe's life. Go upstairs where we have refreshments and can all talk to each other about how much we miss him. Thank you very much.
As you leave the chapel, would you kindly sign the register book and make a note